Okay, so I think I've actually figured out my lighting situation. I just have to wait until the sun sets so that the massive bay window that I have over here doesn't like blind me with all the sunlight. The only thing is you get to see my ring light whenever I directly look at the camera. So I'm going to keep my head down because if I do this, I just can't see a dang thing. So anyway, we didn't come here to listen to me rattle on about my lighting situation. We came here to talk about Mogwai. Let's do it. As the Love Continues by Mogwai. So for those that don't know, Mogwai is a Scottish post-rock, progressive rock band, and I really fell in love with them in the early 2010s with the release of Hardcore Will Never Die, But You Will. And then I subsequently dove into their The Hawk is Growling, Happy Songs for Happy People, and Mr. Beast. These albums of theirs just blew me away so that I was excited and hungry for every new release that they were going to bring about. In fact, Hardcore Will Never Die, But You Will really helped me throughout the early 2010s. I love their softer approach while still having this edge, this teeth to it. Their ability to create these really beautiful soundscapes of music and creating this really off-kilter atmospheres within their playing styles. Put them above just your average run-of-the-mill generic post-rock group. Their attention to atmosphere is what really sets them apart. From there, we've got the Rave Tapes and their last album of Every Country's Son. So this is their 10th studio album, but they have a lot of different soundtracks as well. So I think altogether their discography is at 16, 17 if you include the soundtracks, but 10 if you're looking at just studio albums. Now we come to As the Love Continues. This continues a trend that I'm very excited about within the 2021, which is we've been getting some really great music, and I've been loving it. So a little bit of a spoiler alert in that sense. I think that As the Love Continues is probably their most mature and their most accessible of all of their experiments so far. And I mean that in the whole aspect of that sentence. This is another continuation of their experimentation with music. They're pushing the boundaries of what music can do and what sounds they can produce while really focusing in on the accessibility to bring it down to earth so that you can actually enjoy it. And the album opens off just brilliantly with To the Bin, My Friends, Tonight We Vacate Earth. Very similar to Last Chance to Evacuate Planet Earth before it's recycled. Apparently this was recorded as the speaker was in his sleep. So a little bit of an interesting tidbit there. I'm not quite sure if that's true or not. I love that this opens the album off very beautifully in that it's a very slow burn where really being introduced to the stylings, the slow guitars and the overlays of synths and the slow blossom of the song until it gets to about the 2.5 minutes where the song actually does open up and explode. I love the punchy guitars and the bombastic drums, because up to that point we've just had a little bit of the cymbals, a little bit of the hi-hats just to kind of create the rhythm of the overall songs, and then we get that big boom that we have at the 2.5 minutes that I really like, and I love that they really take their time to really develop this song. And it really does provide this almost trance-like atmosphere for the group. It's very hypnotic in their presentation. It's not necessarily all that repetitive, but the beat and the rhythms themselves are that allow that main melody to really flow through. Then we come into Here We Go Forever, the second track, and it feels very almost Rave Tapes, like very experimental in the presentation of the music that they try. It's much more synthetic. It's a lot more playing with gizmos and gadgets on here. Gizmos and Mogwai, But this is one of the things that I love about Mogwai is the blending between the traditional acoustic sounds of like an acoustic guitar with these synthesized technological aspects. Like it almost feels like a group of kids experimenting with the strange like Fisher-Price or MIDI keyboards that have hacked into them and created the different soundscapes and layers on top of these homegrown acoustical elements. And the blending of those are really, really well thought out. And of course, how can I talk about Mogwai without talking about the climbs and the builds of these songs? Even though the second track of Here We Go Forever starts off very off kilter, a little bit weird, a little bit strange, by the time we get to the end point, and even though it's only about 4 minutes and 45 seconds, the climb that we have, the environments that we've explored during this time, it brings us to this whole new atmosphere, this whole new environment that allows the song to develop into this really fun journey. Then we come into Dry Fantasy, and I feel like this is another aspect of the band that I really love, which is their more space rock, more trippy, more transit type of music, where they're not trying to blow down the doors and like knock your socks off. They're just trying to really elevate and experiment with this sounds. So it's very trancy, it's very space rocky, it's very ethereal. You're trying to hold on to things, but they're not quite catching. Very interesting in the approach there, and it's also extremely accessible. Like, it's very tangible, even though it feels like you're drifting off on this endless sea. You're still able to like perch down and grab onto solid ground. And even though a lot of these tracks that I've already mentioned do push the boundaries and do test the limits of the band, I do feel like there's a little bit of retread that's found on this album, specifically with the track of Richie's Sacramento and the second last track of Supposedly We Were Neighbors. Both of these feel like they were kind of the best of the crop from rave tapes, as well as Hardcore Will Never Die But You Will. Specifically with the last track of Supposedly We Were Neighbors, I'm feeling a very big like werewolf from Hardcore Will Never Die But You Will, and it's bringing out some of my favorite moments from that album and then kind of recontextualize them and then putting them back onto this album, especially with a track such as Supposedly We Were Neighbors. And if you think about it in that sense, they could have been neighbors off of that album that was then lifted and put onto this one. Same with Richie Sacramento. It's a good track, but I also feel as though it was something that was left off of one of the other albums. But talking about moving the music forward, we come into the fifth track of Drive the Nail. And this track is one of my favorites off the album. It's one of the longest tracks at 7 minutes and 14 seconds. I love the build. I love the climb. This is what really draws me to Mogwai, is that slow progression and that slow build to this really explosive moment. And it doesn't take long for them to build into their first crescendo. And I love the ebb and flow. They don't just build up to one crescendo and then kind of taper it down. They have multiple builds. And this is just one that I really do gravitate towards and really do love. And this is also really focusing in on the talent of the band, because they're not just relying on synthesized sounds or really interesting tinkering with different soundscapes. Really, it's just their guitars and the builds. So it still shows that even though they love to create these really gnarly and fun sounds within a synthetic approach, they're still able to really craft a beautiful and brilliant song with just a couple of guitars and a drum beat, which is actually kind of funny because the next track of Fuck Off Money, pardon my French, it does exactly that. They're playing with sounds. It almost has like this Daft Punk sound wave of the lyrics that are on here. And I love how trippy this one, how space rocky it is, how almost psychedelic it feels at times. It really feels like if Daft Punk went more mainstream rock rather than EDM in their approach in terms of their musical stylings. And I mean, RIP Daft Punk now that I've brought them up, but I still love where we go with this track and how up in the air it all feels. And again, kind of like what we had with Richie Sacramento and Dry Fantasy, even though it is so up in the air, it's still immediately tangible. And I feel like the next track of Ceiling Granny is, I mean, for one thing, I believe it's a callback to the third Exorcist movie. I think that's the one where they go to Africa. Anyway, Granny's up on the ceiling. I love the fact that this is a blending of the expressions that we've had up until this point, where we have that experimentation in terms of the soundscapes, but everything is rooted in a very rock essence, and it's the overtones that we have. Like, I love how they're experimenting with the processing, like the mixing and the mastering, and I could just see the band just having a blast behind the mixing board and really trying all these different techniques when it comes to presenting their music, having this like waveform in terms of the headphones. And you definitely need to listen to it in stereo on a good pair of headphones, because it really plays with the music in that sense, while still being at the heart a very simple rockin' track. I love the next two tracks, and these are probably my two favorite tracks of Midnight Flit and Pat Stains. I love how otherworldly both of these feel, how almost haunting these two tracks are. I love Midnight Flit in it. To this day, I'm still, like, I've been listening to this album for a couple of days now, and it feels like something. Like, it feels like it's either off of a soundtrack, or maybe it's just because I have Daft Punk on the brain right now. It feels like a couple of the tracks that were on that one, like Giorgio on Giorgio, or Contact, the last track off of Random Access Memories, in this massive climb. And it's the real big buildup that we have on this track that I just gush over. I love how this song really blossoms into creativity. And even when you think this song is done progressing and growing, they show that they still have a lot more room to go. And I love the climb, and I love being swept away, almost in like this riptide of this wave that crashes over and then pulls me right back into the ocean. And then this is followed up with Pat Stains. It features one of my all-time favorite saxophone players of Colin Stetson. And if you haven't already checked his work out, please do so. He is a genius when it comes to experimental, like neoclassical music. It's what he is able to do with a guitar, or what he's able to do with a saxophone is just brilliant, and I just can't help but love it. And what he's able to add to this track, it plays very much in the background, and it's this haunting overtone of sounds, and it feels almost like this Lovecraftian soundscapes, where it's almost beyond description of these strange highs and lows contrasting with one another. But because it's not quite buried, but just on the peripheries of this track, that really allows it to come to such a strange little flourishing. So I've already mentioned Supposedly We Were Nightmares. Let's come to the final one of It's What I Want to Do, Mum. Again, I don't think that they could have chosen a better track to end this album off with. It's everything that I love about music at this point. You know, it's such a big build to such a satisfying end. It's a perfect way to really finish off the album. I think it's a great presentation. The music builds, and it's a great climb. I think it's a great way to end this album off. So, I mean, overall, I think this is the most mature, the most accessible, and in some ways also the most experimental that the boys have ever done to this point. I think they took a lot from what they've learned working on soundtracks, creating and mirroring moods that they've had to do, and then put all of that onto this album here. It's my favorite work from them up until this point. And the more I listen to it, the more I get out of it. So this is one that is very, very easily one that I love with my whole heart. I highly recommend you guys check it out. It gets the Note seal of approval, and it's one of those run, don't walk to go and listen to it. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those, if you haven't already listened to it, I implore you to go and check it out, especially if you're a fan of this style of post-rock flavors of music. It's really, really astounding what these guys were able to do. Not only within our current climate, but just within music. It's a real treat and a real joy. That's what I have to say about As the Love Continues from Mogwai. What did you guys think? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know by commenting down below. And if you like what you see and you want to help support me, consider donating to my Patreon. I've left that link down below. You get your name at the end credits, as well as other fun perks, depending on how much you want to donate. And I think that's about it. So thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, Notes out.